Okay, so where we left off was Act 4, Scene 3, and we saw Malcolm and Macduff finally interacting, and them talking about the fate of Scotland and how Scotland, what Scotland has become since Macbeth took control. So read through this scene so you can pause at correct points, at the points I need you to pause at. So, Malcolm does say, "What I believe I'll wail, what no believe, and what I can redress, as I shall find the time to, friend, I will. What you have spoke, it may be so perchance, this tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongues, was once thought honest." So, this is, again, where Macbeth is being referred to as a tyrant. So tyrant is someone who rules, is a leader, but they lead unfairly, they rule unfairly, and they cause a lot of pain to others. Now, he talks about his name blisters their tongues. And I want you to look at that metaphor as well. His sole name, just his name, causes us pain to even say it. So that is a metaphor, but it's also very hyperbolic. So it's hyperbole, which means it's exaggeration. So he's exaggerating how much he hates Macbeth. And the reason that he's exaggerating that is to really get across to the audience just how terrible Macbeth is. But it's also to show that he's gone from someone where everyone was singing his praises. They were saying brave Macbeth, noble Macbeth. Remember those adjectives to describe him at the start, brave and noble. What this does is it creates a contrast from who Macbeth was at the beginning to who he is now. So he's so horrendous now that they can't even say his name, but at the beginning they were singing his praises. So that's what we need to write down here. So you might need to pause the video because that's quite a long point. But he also says he was once thought honest. So again, it's showing us that you can't always trust the people that you that seem trustworthy. So again, there's a lot in this play about trust. Who do you trust? Can you trust anyone? What if people are too ambitious? And it says, you know, you have loved him well. He actually says to Macduff, you used to be his friend. And he then says he's not harmed you yet, he's not touched you yet, basically meaning he's not hurt you. Now there's an example of dramatic irony here where we actually, it makes it more tragic because we know that Macduff's family's been killed. And he says, I am young, but something you may discern of him through me, and wisdom to offer up a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry God. Now, what's really interesting here is he's basically saying, you know, Macbeth's done nothing to you. What if you offer him me in order to get what you want from Macbeth? So Malcolm is very distrusting. He doesn't trust people, which perhaps makes him wiser than his father, because his father trusted Macbeth and gave him everything. And then Macbeth killed Duncan. So it's quite interesting here that we're seeing that Malcolm's quite wise. So he talks about being young, and he also calls himself an innocent lamb, a poor innocent lamb. Now that is an allusion, you need to write this down, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-M, an allusion to the Bible, where the sacrificial lamb, so, you know, the Lamb of God. Now, lambs are, we need to write this down, they connote innocence, they connote purity, they're often associated with Easter, and, you know, the crucifixion of Jesus and the rising of Jesus. It's almost as though, you know, Malcolm is saying that he believes he will be sacrificed to appease an angry God. So he will be hurt by Macduff. And it does show, A, that Malcolm is very, very Christian, which makes him contrast Macbeth. But it also shows that, B, he's quite wise. You know, he doesn't just trust people blindly. You need to earn his trust. Now, Macduff does say, I'm not treacherous, but, you know, this is the point where we actually see that Malcolm's very, very wise. And he does say, a good and virtuous nature may recoil in an imperial charge. So, although you're good, if you've had a bad ruler, you may become a worse person. And he also uses another allusion here. So here's where we're seeing that Macduff is very much a religious person. Macduff learns his lessons from the Bible. Sorry, Malcolm. Malcolm is very much a religious person. He learns his lessons from the Bible, and this is good because remember, Malcolm is next in line to be king rightfully. He's rightfully next in line to be king. Meaning that God has chosen Malcolm, because God chooses who is born to be a king, and that's the divine right of kings. So God chose Malcolm. Now, what's interesting here is that Shakespeare is trying to suggest that or trying to portray Malcolm as a very, very pious, very wise, very religious man. Because look at the next thing he says. He says, angels are bright still, though the brightest fell. So you can see that some people look very good, but actually you can't trust everyone. Now, what this is an allusion to, it's another biblical allusion, to the story of Lucifer. So Lucifer was known as, you know, God's favorite angel. He was meant to be the most beautiful, the most wonderful angel that God created, and he rebelled against God, and he was sent to hell. And this is because he betrayed God. So he was God's favorite angel. He was the brightest, most beautiful angel, but he betrayed God. Now look again at how Malcolm is learning his lesson here. Just because you look good doesn't mean you are. So again, he's learning from the Bible. He's being a very pious, very good person. And that's what you need to write down here. These are all the lessons that Malcolm is learning from the Bible. And, you know, you can look good, but it doesn't mean you are. And so he's saying to Macduff, I can't trust you just because you seem like a good person to trust. And, you know, he does say, perchance, even there where I did find my doubts, why in that rawness left you wife and child, those precious motives, those strong knots of love without leave taking. So, you know, he says actually, you know, Macduff was hoping that he could overthrow Macbeth, but all of a sudden, you know, I know that you want to overthrow Macbeth, but you've just kind of run here straight away. You've left your wife, you've left your children, you know, and then you've just come straight here. It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems suspicious. Now, Macduff then is really, really interesting when he says, bleed, bleed, poor country. So he personifies Scotland. Write it down, get your pen. He personifies Scotland as something living, something breathing. And this is to really personify the suffering that's going on under Macbeth. And it's one way for Shakespeare to warn that, you know, if you have a bad ruler, bad things will happen. If you've not got the rightful king, then people will suffer. And, you know, he repeats that word tyranny or tyrant to describe Macbeth. And that's really important. And he says, I would not be the villain that thou think'st, for the whole space that's in the tyrant's grasp, and the rich East too. So the East was said to be very, very, very well off. The East is where you would see a lot of things coming from, sort of the Middle East. You would see lots of perfumes and gold and things like that. And you know, Macduff is saying there is nothing that could tempt me to go with Macbeth. So we're really seeing here that Macduff is a very noble person. There is nothing in the world that would tempt Macduff to be anything like Macbeth. So we can see that actually Macbeth, that is creating a contrast between Macbeth and Macduff, because Macduff would never become a bad person no matter what was offered to him, but Macbeth did. So we start to think, was Macbeth even noble from the beginning? Because he was so easily tempted. So we see a big contrast between Macduff and Macbeth, that perhaps Macduff's just a better person. And Malcolm also says, I think our country sinks beneath the yoke, it weeps, it bleeds, and each day a new gash is added to her wounds. So again, look at the personification of Scotland to show how negative Macbeth's rule is, to show that when the wrong person is in charge, terrible things happen. And we'll move on to page 74 as well. Now, Malcolm actually then seems very, very brave. He does say, I shall tread upon the tyrant's head or wear it on my sword. I would love to go to battle with Macbeth, but my poor country shall have more vices than it had before, more suffer and more sundry ways than ever, by him that shall succeed. He actually says, I think I'd be a worse king than Macbeth. So in a second, it's going to get very confusing, but I want to lay it out to you. Malcolm needs to know that he can trust Macduff. If Malcolm can trust Macduff, then he knows that Macduff will want the best thing for Scotland. If Macduff is just trying to get Malcolm home to lead him into a trap, which we know he's not, so there's a bit of dramatic irony there. If he's trying to lead him into a trap, then he won't care what he says next. He'll just say, no, come back with me. It's fine, don't worry. So Malcolm is about to see how many lies he can tell to push Macduff. And if Macduff says, oh, I don't care about any of that, because he's about to tell him some really horrible things, like just to say, I'm a horrible person. If Macduff really wanted Malcolm to come back to England, Macduff would say, no, it's fine, ignore them, and then just try and get him back no matter what. If Macduff really wants what's best for Scotland, he'll give up, because Malcolm is about to portray himself as a really, really bad person. All of this is a lie, but it's only so Malcolm can see whether he can trust Macbeth or not. So you want to think of it almost like if I said to you, for example, you wanted to trick me into going somewhere, and I said, I don't have an oyster, you'd have to pay for me. Yeah, no, I'll pay for you. Okay, but also, before I go, then I need you to buy me a Big Mac. Okay, I'll buy you a Big Mac. Okay, and also I need you to carry me to the bus stop in a piggyback. Oh, yeah, no, I'll carry you. Now, if you actually think about it, anyone in their right mind, unless they would be like, no, do it yourself. Like, get on the bus. Like, I might pay for you to get on the bus. Like, I might pay because you've lost your oyster, but I'm not giving you a piggyback. Your legs work. I'm not giving you a Big Mac. That's ridiculous. There comes a point where you draw a line. You'd be like, look, I want you to come, but don't take the mick here. And so what Malcolm is trying to do is to see where that line is drawn with Macduff. Because if he doesn't draw that line, then he looks even more suspicious, doesn't he? If Malcolm says, I'm a terrible person, you don't want me to be king, and he's like, no, I do. He needs to know if he can trust Macduff or not. So it's about to get really confusing, but we're going to have a look at what Malcolm actually says. So he actually says in the next part, Black Macbeth would seem pure as snow. So look, there's a juxtaposition there between snow, the white, and the black of Macbeth. Now, black is meant to be associated with evil. It's associated with, normally in death, because people used to wear black. Normally it's associated with, sadness and evil, because people used to wear black at funerals. So that's why black is meant to connote evil. And white is meant to connote purity, because remember, a bride would wear white on her wedding day, so it's meant to be pure and innocent. And he's actually saying, I'm such a horrible person that Macbeth's going to look, pure and innocent next to me. And the poor state esteem him as a lamb, being compared with my confineless harms. To not have any confines means that you cannot be controlled. I'm so bad, I can't be controlled. And Macduff says, not in the legions of horrid hell can come a devil more damned in evils to top Macbeth. So again, Macbeth is being associated with the devil here. There's been a couple of times in this scene, hasn't there? So we've seen him be compared to Lucifer. We've seen Macduff also be compared to Lucifer as well. But we've seen, to appease an angry god, we've seen him be compared to devilish things. And we're seeing it again. And Macduff says, don't worry, honestly, Macbeth is so terrible, you can't be worse than him. You can't be worse. Don't worry about it. Okay, so that hasn't worked. So now Malcolm's thinking, right, well, I need to trick him again. So he says, grant him anything, lecherous, lusty, wanting women, luxurious, deceitful, malicious, every sin that has a name, he may be as sinful as they come, but there's no bottom to my voluptuousness. Your wives, your daughters, your matrons, your maids could not fill up the cistern of my lust. Basically meaning that Malcolm is saying that he will engage in sexual activity with everyone. All the wives, all the daughters, so he will take wives, as in he will, have extramarital affairs, which is sinful at the time, isn't it? Because you're not meant to have sex outside of marriage. But Malcolm is saying, I'm so lustful, I'll take your daughters, I won't marry them. And again, that threatens a man, really, to have his daughter, to have her virtue, her innocence, her virginity stolen. It's meant to be quite shocking. And he says, better Macbeth than me, I'm full of lust, I can't be contained. But Macduff says, boundless intemperance in nature is a tyranny. So, man's character is hurt. It's natural that everyone has a flaw, don't worry. It has been the untimely emptying of the happy throne and fall of many kings. So, many kings have fallen because they can't control themselves. But fear not to take upon you what is yours. You may convey your pleasures in a spacious plenty and yet seem cold. We'll look away from it. Don't worry about it. We will allow you to do what you need to do. Being lusty isn't as bad as Macbeth. Don't worry. We will have willing dames enough. There'll be loads of women who want to sleep with the king, so don't worry about it. There cannot be that vulture in you to devour so many. So a vulture is symbolic here. So a vulture is a bird, feeds on anything and everything it can get its hands on. So it's meant to be quite a greedy bird. It will feed on the dead, it will feed on anything. So he's saying, the vulture in you cannot possibly devour so many as will to greatness dedicate themselves. So you will not be able to sleep with as many women as we have women who'll be willing to sleep with the king. So he's telling him, don't worry. So Malcolm's like, well, that hasn't worked, so let's try something else, see if he's trustworthy. So the next one is that with this there grows in my most ill-composed affection such a staunchless avarice that were I king I should cut off the nobles for their lands. So he actually says, I will cut off means kill. I would kill the noblemen for their lands. I desire jewels. I'm hungry. So look at that word hunger, make me hunger for more. It's a metaphor. And I want you to write that down. The metaphor of hunger is to show that he's greedy. So he's a greedy person. He'd kill nobles to steal from them. He wants jewels. He wants riches. He wants wealth. And that metaphor of the hunger shows that obviously when you're hungry for things, then you desire them and you'll just take because you're so hungry. But that doesn't work. Macduff says, you know, don't worry, do not fear. Scotland will, you know, Scotland has enough to give you. Will give you everything you'll ever want as king. And then he says, you know, with other graces weighed. So you are graceful in other ways. You know, you may be greedy, but there are better things about you. Because remember, you are the rightful king. But Malcolm says, no, there's nothing else about me. There's nothing graceful. There's nothing wonderful. I have no graces. I have no good qualities. He says, you know, justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. I have no relish of them. I have no good qualities. That's what he said. I have no good qualities. Nothing at all. You know, I'm not patient. I don't persevere with things. I let them go. I'm not devoted to God. You know, I don't feel anything. So I'm a terrible person. And that's what Malcolm's trying to say. So, you know, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell. So I would plunge Scotland into a time of absolute horrendous hellishness. So again, he's talking about hell. You know, he's portraying himself as against God here. I would uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth. So remember when we were talking about order versus disorder, that Macbeth basically says, you know, untie the winds and let them fight against the churches. He's talking about how he wants to create a lot of chaos in the world. Well, now Malcolm's saying to Macduff, I want to create chaos in the world. And at this moment in time, the audience doesn't know that Malcolm's lying either. So it almost seems like there's hopelessness right now, because Malcolm doesn't want to restore the correct order either. So it's quite shocking, because he's meant to be the rightful king, divine right of kings. And Macduff says, oh, Scotland, Scotland. And Malcolm says, you know, if you think I'm fit to be king, then tell me now. If you want to still take me home, take me back to Scotland, tell me now. And this is where Malcolm will know if Macduff is telling the truth or not. Fit to govern? Oh, not fit to live. Meaning, you know, you're such a terrible person. You shouldn't even be alive. Oh, nation miserable, with untitled tyrant, bloody sceptred. So remember, remember the sceptre is the sign of the king. So he's ruling in a bloody way. He's ruling as a tyrant. He says, when shalt thou see thy wholesome days again? So when will there be order in our country again? Since that the truest issue of thy throne by his own interdiction stands accursed and does blaspheme his breed. So what he means there, again, it's metaphorical. The truest issue of thy throne, meaning the next in line, the divine right of kings, stands accursed. So he stands there cursed. Metaphorical there, that he's not actually cursed, but he seems like a cursed person. So what Macduff is wondering now is, why did God put Malcolm here? Why did God make Macbeth king? What's going on? So Macduff here is really questioning the divine right of kings. He's questioning his belief system, because he's so upset, because he doesn't think that Scotland will ever have any kind of order again. So he then says, you know, thy royal, you blaspheme your breed, meaning, you know, you're going against your good family. Thy royal father was a most sainted king. So look here about how, you know, Malcolm should be a good person. His father was a sainted king, and that means he's very, very holy, very good. The queen that bore thee oftener upon her knees than on her feet. So your mother, the queen, was actually more often praying. She was more often on her knees, hands clasped, praying to God, than she was walking around. So she was so devoted to God. Died every day she lived. So she lived each day as if it were her last. She was such a good person. You know, she didn't sort of live to then, she didn't live for herself, she lived for others. She lived to go to heaven. Fare thee well, these devils thou repeatest upon thyself, hath banished me from Scotland. Oh, my breast, thy hope ends here. So my heart, I have no hope anymore. Now, this is where we find out why Malcolm was doing it. So he gives us a whole list, a whole reason, a whole speech. He actually says, you know, Macduff, this noble passion, child of integrity, hath from my soul whipped the black scruples, reconciled my thoughts to thy good truth and honour. You being so devoted to our country, you wanting the best king, actually shows me that you're not someone to be suspicious of. You have good intentions. So you have thy good truth and honour. You are an honourable person. You know, devilish Macbeth by many of these trains hath sought to win me into his power. So I can't trust people because Macbeth wants me to, Macbeth wants to trick me into coming back so he can kill me. And he says, so I've had to be very wise. But God above deal between thee and me, for even now I put myself into thy direction and unspeak mine own detraction. Here abjure the taints and blames I laid upon myself. So I'm telling you, everything I said before was a lie. Okay? I am yet unknown to woman. So he says he is a virgin. Now he is unmarried, which means that, again, he's not a lusty person. And it's also interesting as well that he says he's unknown to woman. Now, a lot of people argue that a lot of Macbeth's downfall was being tricked by his wife and by the witches. So Macbeth's weakness is often women as well. And Malcolm doesn't have that weakness. So it's one point of contrast between him and Macbeth. He doesn't have the weakness that Macbeth has. He's not influenced by women because he's unknown to women. He's never slept with a woman. He's never been tempted by a woman. And that will probably be the case until he gets married and has a queen and then has children, and then those children, you know, go in the divine right of kings. He says, I scarcely coveted what was mine own. To covet something is to sort of feel it, that it's quite precious. And he does say, you know, I don't even covet things that are mine, let alone anyone else's stuff. You know, I'm not a greedy person. I was never forsworn. I've never lied. I would not betray the devil to his fellow. I wouldn't betray anyone. I would never break my faith. I would not. My first false speaking was this upon myself. So what you just witnessed was the first time I've ever even lied. And what I am truly is thine and my poor country's. So he dedicates himself to Scotland rather than Macbeth, who tries to take Scotland for himself, if that makes sense. So he dedicates himself to Scotland. So there's another point of contrast here. He doesn't lie. He's not greedy. He's not corrupted by women. So he's very, very contrasting to Macbeth, but he also says, you know, I will give myself to you. I am the servant of Scotland. I am here to serve my country. And that's what he says. So don't worry, I've already got men in readiness to go to war with Macbeth. I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to take my throne. I'm ready to be the rightful king. So we finally see here that order is going to be restored. And why are you silent? You know, Macduff says, such welcome and unwelcome things at once, 'tis hard to reconcile. You know, now I'm a bit suspicious of you, but I suppose, but we need to just get rid of Macbeth, really. Okay, so I will leave it there because the doctor comes in a second, and this is a really, really long scene to unpack. So I realise there's lots of things to make notes on. There's lots of things to understand as well. So I will leave it there, and we will go over the next part, which is Act 4, Scene 3, Part 2. We will go over that in the next video.